let's get this show on the road. Hi, Rachel and Bo, and welcome to everybody. We've got 20 people with us right now, which is just great. And let me do a few introductions. I am Angie Albright, and I'm the Professional Development Chair for the Arkansas Museums Association. And I want to welcome you to our third virtual session. And I want to thank all of our volunteers who have moved their in-person sessions to virtual, and they've been really gracious about it, and we appreciate that. Please note that our session is being recorded, and then we'll send all of the registered attendees a link in a few days. We also have closed captioning happening. So I'm not sure that we'll have a transcript for that. We might, but that may not have been said. But anyway, you can turn on the closed captioning if you need it. I want to thank our sponsors, the Arkansas Humanities Council and JAMA Best and Melanie Thornton for making these virtual sessions possible. You'll notice that on our website and on the slideshow that I was playing in advance that our next session is January 13th with Phil Shellhammer, and he's going to be talking about gamification in museums. And he has some really cool digital things to show us. You can start registering for that next week. The link isn't live yet, but it will be in a few days. This session is being done as a webinar, so we don't have an open discussion possibility, but you can make comments in the chat or put questions in the Q&A, and I'll keep track of them. Let me introduce our speakers today. Rachel Whitaker is a research specialist at the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. She brings to this project, they're going to talk about a background in library science and historical museum education, as well as some skills in coding and computer technology, which is definitely beneficial to the creation of metadata. If you're not sure what metadata is, I bet you'll know in less than an hour. Bo Williams is a photographer at Shiloh and a colleague of Rachel's, and he brings to this project a background in photography, digital image capture and processing, as well as an artist's eye for detail. Additionally, he works with alternative photographic methods, including darkroom processes. So I guess that means there are still people who use darkrooms. That's pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and turn things over to you guys. And people, please feel free to comment and discuss things in the chat. Welcome.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks a lot. So, Bo, Rachel, we work at Shiloh Museum here in Springdale. Our museum covers 6 counties in Northwest Arkansas, including Benton, Boone, Madison, Newton, Carroll, and Washington. And we focus mostly on everyday life in the Arkansas Ozarks, really. First of all, Bo and I would like to say we're sitting side by side next to each other and we're not wearing masks. We recognize this. But we only see each other mostly. Yeah. We're quarantined across the street. So generally when we go across the street or we're anywhere else, we do wear our masks. We have them on our desks, but for the purposes of this presentation, we're not wearing a mask today. We also would kind of like to have an idea, if you guys can post in maybe the comments or the Q&A in the chat or the Q&A, like what size museum you have, and also have you ever done any digitization and kind of the scope of that, just, you know, just quickly and briefly, so we have an idea. We're also collecting statistics too, but this lets us know what's going on and what we're working with here. How technical we should get. So there are handouts that we've provided you guys, or that will be handed out to you guys at some point. And this is a really big topic. Thanks, Bev. This is a really big topic, and it's really too big to do in one workshop, and especially one that's limited to like an hour and 15 minutes. So so we provided you guys with a little more condensed information. Basically, what you're going to get today is a brief condensed version of all of our research and everything we've done and the decisions we've made, and it's all here in this notebook. This is our brains on paper at this point. But also because this is something we've lived with for the last 2 years, and change. This has been our world, so we may use terminology, technological specific words or jargon or even acronyms. Thank you, that's the word I was looking for. Acronyms that you may not be familiar with. So please, at any time, I have a separate computer set up over here. We're watching the chat and the Q&A on this computer. And if you have anything you want us to stop and go back, please put that there. Yeah, or clarification, especially, let us know.
And we're going to try to keep it fairly base level. We're not going to go too technical. So if there's something you want us to elaborate on as well, feel free to ask.
So we're in a new program, a new department. We named ourselves. That was fun. But the goal of our program is to preserve the original items and mitigate the handling of those fragile items. And those fragile items, those original items, are generally more permanent in the long run than the digital items. But this does also increase access to our collection. And that's one of the things that we're shooting for. So I showed you our binder, that massive thing that we carry around with us. And this is a brave new world for us. One, for a lot of people, digitization has been around for a while, but in many ways it's still in its infancy. Until recently, only sites with larger budgets and incredibly tech-savvy staff and resources could have been able to attempt this feat. So think Library of Congress, Smithsonian, Duke University, Beloit College is doing this surprisingly early on. But only in the last 20 years or it's been going on for about 20 years, but only in the last few years have really other museums and smaller institutions been able to start doing this. It's kind of a
right.
It's kind of a thing.
That's one thing that I did want to clarify there. Digitization is very circumstantial. It depends on your organization, your resources, that sort of thing. So we're going to talk you through our process, how we got to where we are now, kind of the hurdles that we had to jump over, and just the challenges we faced, and also just our thought process and the alternatives that we chose not to go for, but might be useful to some of you. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So there are some standards. There's not really a universal precedent. We had some ideas going into this, but no one was really doing what we were thinking about doing until a few months ago when we were vindicated. It was a moment for us. When Library of Congress and Smithsonian announced that they were going to actually use the method we're going to use as one of their primary methods of capture, because it is versatile, it is sustainable. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, sustainable. The main caveat for that, as Bo pointed out, is that while this is the path that we took, we understand that depending on the collection you're working with, the budget you have, the skills that are available to you, whether it's your staff or your volunteers, you may not be able to do what we're doing. We did invest a considerable amount of money into our system, and we know that there are smaller institutions who may not be able to do this. But in your packet, you're going to find some examples of alternative methods of capture and processing that are good, better, and best, but it also is budget-based if you want to look at it. We also will, at any point after this, if you want to meet with us, we'll do a Zoom meeting, we'll come to your site, you can come to our site, we'll talk to you more in depth about your specific issues at your site if you want to. But we also conducted extensive research.
Half the binder.
Yeah, half of the binder is research that is specifically asking questions about what other people are doing. And we'll also be happy to share those results with you. I have a spreadsheet. I always have a spreadsheet. So we, in conducting our research, we made several visits to places that already had digitization departments. We went to Springfield Public in Missouri. We went to the University of Arkansas Special Collections. We visited Arkansas State Archives and the Butler Center. And then I called and emailed Beloit College because one of the guys up there in their department is actually one of the people who does the training nationally for people who are wanting to do this process or wanting to do digitization. We looked at different technologies.
Okay.
Thanks, Angie. We investigated flatbed scanners because that was what a lot of the people that we were looking at were using. Computers, what were the specs and graphics we were going to need? Also, what were they capable of? We looked at gaming computers, Macs. We also looked at building our own PC.
Yeah, we tried to not be biased in any part of this.
Right. He's a Mac guy, I'm a PC, and it's one of those things.
We get along. It's all right.
It's all right. But we had to look at digital cameras, and then we also had to consider OCR, because one of the things that we want is accessibility. And so the optical character recognition is important, because not only does it allow someone who is visually impaired to access the material in other ways, but it also is searchable for our researchers if we put a document online with text. So that optical character recognition means that it picks out the individual letters and then the words, and it makes it pretty user friendly. And then we looked at digital asset management systems. We considered content DM, and this is where the metadata part comes in. Metadata is basically your information about your objects. It's your cataloging. It's the data behind all of that. So we looked at content DM, which is a big one. It's OCLC. It's been around for forever. We looked at Luna, which is newer than content DM, but it's been around long enough that we felt like it was sustainable. We also looked at Islandora and Symphony. And Islandora and Symphony are both free programs. The only problem with them is they do require extensive coding on the part of the creators. And before you completely throw them out though, keep in mind that they do have a great community forum where people share strings of code and suggestions for setup of a management system. So if your budget, which the digital asset management system, because it's a long-term investment, can be really expensive, if you decide to go this route, you're not completely alone if you do choose to go with one of the free coding options. Some of the standards and the policies and like rules and stuff that we had to keep in mind were also just your regular standards. There's international and there's national and there's specific to your site. We use the FADGI method mostly for, at least setting a baseline. We also had to keep in mind copyright. And then our own museum missions and policies. We couldn't do anything if it didn't really mesh with what we already had in place.
So moving on a little bit, we're going to talk about actual decisions that we've made, conclusions that we've come to. First of which is just archival standards, what we're going to be adhering to. So safe handling of objects. We've opted to not use gloves when handling historic prints and negatives and that sort of thing. But rather just clean, dry, recently washed hands, and then nitrile gloves when necessary. And the reason we've chosen to do that is because when you wear a glove and you're handling these delicate items, sometimes you lose a bit of tactile feel and you don't quite know specifically how you're holding it or how much pressure you're putting into it. So the whole point of digitization is to keep those original items safe and increase their longevity. So it'd be a shame to cause more damage while trying to preserve them. Along with that, I mean, it might be obvious, but a clean workspace, no food, no drinks, that sort of thing. But beyond that, specifically for our method, and even if you go the bed scanner route, controlling dust accumulation, because if you're digitizing something like a 35mm negative that's this big, a speck of dust becomes just a glaring blemish. Along with that, just light. So for our copy stand, we'll show you here in a minute, it actually has lights built into it. So all the light that you see right now kind of has to be covered a little bit so it doesn't interfere when actually capturing. Couple notes on just safe handling of fragile objects like we've been talking about. What we do is mainly going to be photographic images, film, and albums, that sort of thing. At least that's where we're starting. And these things are quite old and they tend to warp and bend and peel and curl. And it's just very, very important not to force these things to be flat, because you'll end up causing more damage than good. When it comes to photographic prints, one side is going to be your emulsion side. That's usually the shiny one. Avoid touching that because that still has a memory, and fingerprints can actually get burned into the emulsion forever. So make sure you touch just the paper backing or the very edges of prints. And when it comes to something like albums, sometimes if they've been, closed and pressed down for the last 100 years, they tend to not want to open back up. So just don't force anything, is really the takeaway there.
So one of the things that we're looking at is also how to store these items. What file types are you wanting to use? And in that packet that we're sending you, there are a list of types of files and also which ones fall into those categories. It's not a comprehensive list. There are other types out there, and you can Google search them. We just picked some of the more common ones that are used right now. Do keep in mind that technology changes, and so these codecs and packaging and containers is what they're called, are going to change over time. So we tried to find some ones that have been around for a while and people have been using, and so we're hoping they are a little more sustainable. But again, it changes. So lossy files are files that will corrupt and degrade quickly over time. Because of the compression process. So think of every transfer of a file, every time you save it, every time you open it, every time you copy it or do anything to this file, you're basically compressing that information every time. And so what happens is every time you open it, imagine making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy until eventually all you've got is this pixelated mess, especially if you're working with photographs. It's a little harder to do that with documents because PDFs tend to be more lossless, but lossless files do degrade over time or the technology changes. And so just keep that in mind. They're not as permanent as an actual physical item. Even though we're the Digi department, we also try to stress that to everybody that we talk to, that this is great for sharing your information and keeping people from having to handle all of those items constantly, but it also is not as permanent as that original item.
Shouldn't be considered
right
permanent.
So it's going to last longer than your lossy file because the compression is a little more discreet and careful, and it's going to be a lot slower. Eventually over time, either your file is going to become degraded because of compression or because of where you've saved it.
Or corrupt.
And it's corruption. And so we also looked at file naming conventions for what we were going to do, because we are creating technically a completely new collection. We are digitizing collections that we do have, but technically this will be considered a new collection. So we're going to use the original catalog numbers. But we're going to use there's going to be some variations because we're going digital. So for instance, one of the things we had to look at was our catalog uses colons. Coding, whenever you're doing metadata and when you're writing web pages, basically won't let you do this. So pretty much we're replacing all punctuation with a period so that everything's done consistently across the board and we know that that's a break. But you're going to have to pick your system. You may want to create new numbers, new catalog information for this, or you can stick with the system already in place. We're also looking at redundancy. We have built into our system several layers of redundancy, including the number and type of files, as well as the location of storage. So for our different files that we're going to be saving, we're going to have a master archival file, and it's captured and saved exactly as you capture it. It's raw, and then we're going to convert it to a TIFF and save
raw file type.
A raw. But it's going to have your targets. It's going to have any rulers or anything that you've got in there for reference. The service master is going to be deskewed, cropped, and saved as a TIFF. it's going to be a little more usable. It's going to be what you're going to use for your exhibits, for, you know, in-house use mostly, or if somebody needs a higher quality image that they're going to publish maybe. But the service derivative, which is the one that your public's going to generally interact with, is going to be de-skewed, cropped, and you may have some minor corrections, like for scratching or dust.
White balance.
Yeah, white balance
like
and
that.
different things like that that maybe you didn't catch when you were doing the original capture. This one's going to be saved as a JPEG. It's not going to be saved as a TIFF. So it's going to be a lossy file. You're going to have to replace it a little more often. But it's going to be something you can share through an email or on
Social media
or
anywhere.
Google, you know, whatever.
It's a JPEG.
It's a JPEG. It's smaller. It's manageable. So when we were looking at some of this too, we also had to consider our like the standards of sizes and like what do you capture it at, because depending on what you're doing with this, the JPEG can be much smaller. It doesn't have to be 300 DPI. We recommend 300 DPI for anything you're using at that level, because it's basically a one-to-one capture for, you know, a basic, so if it's 1 inch, it's 1 inch whenever you print it out. But here's where it gets complicated. Bear with me for just a second here. So DPI versus PPI is one of the big things that's out there right now that gets used interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. DPI is specific to print media and is dots per inch. Most commercial printers and publishers print at 300 DPI. So again, that's why we were telling you 300 is a pretty good one. If you know, if you don't have to keep recreating the files over and over, that this just becomes the one you share. PPI, on the other hand, is pixels per inch and is specific to digital media. The industry standard for an archival master is 6,000 pixels on the long edge. One caveat here, especially if you're using a scanner, the standards that are set by high-end scanners, they can go up to, I think, 24,000 DPI or something
ridiculous.
And your scanners are generally going to use DPI instead of PPI, but they're going to have a ridiculously high number, but they're only as good as your computer can process. So while the scanner may be capable of these wonderful, amazingly high resolution scans, if your computer can't process that file that's coming through, or you can't save the file, then you're not going to be able to make the scans that you intended. And basically you've wasted all that money on that really high-end scanner that your computer just can't work with. You're going to get an error message that says it's not enough memory available, and that can be your temporary memory, or it can also be your hard drive.
Speaking of hard drives, I just wanted to point out a differentiation between an SSD hard drive and an HDD. An SSD hard drive is a solid state drive versus an HDD, which is a hard disk drive. Now, the difference between those two, an SSD is kind of the contemporary right now. HDD, that's a bit older technology. We are advocates for SSD for a number of reasons, mostly because they are significantly more stable. They use the same sort of memory that like your little thumb drives, sticks use. It's what your cell phones use. It's compact flash storage. It's just a lot of it. And actually here is one that we use here. This right here is 2 terabytes of flash memory. Just that little thing right there. And there are no moving parts in here. So this is extremely stable and very unlikely to break. But again, they do have a shelf life. The opposite there, or not the opposite, but the alternative is the HDD. It's basically a disk inside of a housing, like a CD or like a floppy disk that spins at a high rate of speed and is read and written that way. But because of all those moving parts, it's extremely fragile and prone to breakage. Do we have something?
Daniel's got a question. He's asking about access. So the question is, do you have any accessing or indexing secrets that you have found to allow you easy and quick access over time for those who don't work with large collections? So like the digital asset management system. Bo does this really cool thing in Lightroom. I'm gonna let him tell you about the metadata part, that in his part of the metadata.
Just the
the searchable functions. But if you do save it as your, if you do save it on as catalog numbers, if you guys have it cataloged or if you have it saved by collection, that helps us when we're creating some of it. But Bo has some things that he does in Lightroom when we're capturing.
In Lightroom, when you're importing images from a camera or card, you can actually tag terms to it. So it's kind of like metadata light. So things like year, location, that sort of thing, that can be saved and tagged to the file in Lightroom automatically. And then when that photo is exported, those tags stay with it.
Daniel says HDD are dinosaurs. We agree.
We agree, 100%.
Wholeheartedly.
SSDs, note here, SSDs tend to be more expensive and smaller storage capacity, but it is 100% worth it. It doesn't matter how big your hard drive is if it fails.
Yeah, and your handout has some information about like the lifespan of some of these.
Mhm.
And the highest end of the lifespan is like you use it once, you store your information, and you go
throw it in a safe.
Yeah, throw it in the safe or the safety deposit box. And so like they'll tell you you can use an SSD hard drive for 5 to 10 years, but that's
under like perfect conditions.
Conditions, yeah. So keep that in mind when
and
you're.
that's an SSD. That's the
right.
The nice one. HDDs are even less. They are dinosaurs. They should go extinct. Moving on a little bit, we're going to get to my side of things, which is more fun. So let's see if we can make this work.
Change your video for. Nice.
There we go. Okay. So this is our copy stand. Let me get my notes so I don't mess up here. So the two options when it comes to digitization, generally you're looking at a bed scanner, which most people are familiar with, and then a copy stand. This is our copy stand. Your camera gets mounted on this little arm right here that raises up and down as needed. Lights hit it from either side. Your object that you're actually copying goes down here on this plate. And the lights come at an angle so that if you have something that has a glossy surface, you don't get weird reflections, that sort of thing. And these are adjustable depending on what it is that you're copying. We have the entire copy stand on a scissor lift so that we can actually raise and lower the entire copy stand itself. So mainly the base here. And then we have a little cutout that we've retrofitted into the ceiling so we can raise this up as needed. Because this setup here can copy things from 35mm negatives, again, tiny, all the way up to, you know, as big a print that will fit on this table. And just having that range makes life a lot easier. The main reason we went with a copy stand is twofold. It's versatile. Like I said, we can get everything from a 35mm negative all the way up to a newspaper, everything in between on here. But it's also non-destructive. Like I said about bed scanners, they tend to open and close. And when you put an object inside, you are pressing it down and smashing it in that bed scanner to try to get an even scan. If you have something that's a little bit warped, that can cause some irreparable damage. In this case, you take your print, you drop it down, and you don't have to touch it again. You copy it, move on. The camera that we use is this guy right here. This is a film camera. This is for reference print, darkroom stuff, so ignore that one. This is the important one. This is a Fujifilm GFX 50S. You don't need to remember that. It's a medium format mirrorless digital camera. The important part there is mirrorless. So if I pop off the lens, you can see that's your sensor right there. So there is no mirror involved. That basically allows us to adapt and use any sort of optics onto this camera as needed. Microscopes, telescopes, different lenses, basically anything. This is a 50 megapixel camera. So we're talking resolution all the way up to 8,256 by 6,192. So well over that 6,000 on the long edge standard we talked about earlier. The main benefit of using a camera like this is just the high dynamic range being the steps between light and dark. And with a bigger sensor like this, you just get a higher dynamic range. But we're also talking more or less the highest possible color accuracy and sharpness and all that fun stuff. Other than the camera, my notes are all mixed up. Okay, because it is a camera, we can use it on the copy stand, obviously, and copy just like this, but also pop it off the copy stand, and it's still just a camera. I can use this to do staff portraits. I can go photograph 3D objects in the basement. I can go off-site and photograph events. Basically, anything we need to, this can do besides the copy stand. So other than the camera, we have the lens itself. This is a 120 millimeter f4 macro lens. You can ignore the numbers. You don't need to remember that. The important part is macro. That just allows this lens to focus really, really close. And then to focus even closer, we have this macro extension tube, which goes in between the camera and the lens itself and allows us to focus even closer, particularly when photographing negatives. To get a little bit technical for a second, try not to go cross-eyed. Using that extension tube, that allows this camera to get to a greater than 1:1 magnification ratio. Now, all that means is the 1:1 is the standard for macro reproduction work specifically. Basically, looking at the size of that sensor again, say we're photographing 35 millimeter negative, that negative is projected onto that sensor at the actual size of the negative. That is 1:1. Hope that makes sense. Besides the camera and the copy stand itself, one other tool that's important is a light table, which is just this guy here. This is what we're using for now. So if we're talking something like negatives or transparencies or anything like that, you need to light it from behind. So these lights get turned off, and this is what you use to backlight the object so that the camera is capturing the illuminated object as opposed to light from the side. Then that's as far as this goes. Then we move over to the actual computer itself, which is what we are currently streaming from. This is a Microsoft Surface Book 3, and let's get that reattached really quick. Be right back. There it is. Okay, so like I said, a Microsoft Surface Book 3. You just saw one of the cool things that it can do. The monitor itself, as well as the cameras, actually pop off of the keyboard, and that's what Rachel was just pointing around at me.
Badly. I'm not the photographer he is.
You're just fine. The reason we chose this computer is because of its high graphics and processing capability. Like I said, those are 50 megapixel raw, uncompressed images, and we're going to be taking several thousand of them. So this computer needs to be able to handle all of that just raw information. Still good over there?
We're good.
Okay. Besides that, we're talking a high resolution screen that is color accurate, which again, when you're talking reproduction, our ultimate goal here being to reproduce these prints and images and negatives in digital form as accurately as possible to the original. So having an accurate high resolution screen is paramount. Another added benefit of the Microsoft Surface just ecosystem in general is Microsoft is continually adding to it. So as we expand the Digi department, we're gonna kind of stay within that ecosystem and get more Surface devices for metadata or volunteers, that sort of thing, as we go forward. That way, these devices can easily communicate with each other, transfer information, and share peripherals, which is another really cool thing about these devices. Like what I got right up here, this is a Microsoft Surface Pen. This works on the screen. You have mice, you have Surface Dial, which is a little thing that actually sits on the screen that
Daniel
you can
will
rotate.
be interested in the dial.
Okay.
If you do something like this, Daniel, it's
Okay.
great for video editing.
So you can basically program actions to the dial. So it's a physical dial that you can actually press and has a click to it, but it rotates on the screen. So if you're switching, or if you're fast forwarding, skipping around through a video, or you're in Photoshop and you're trying to just tune in that perfect color, you can use this dial as opposed to trying to use the scroll wheel on your mouse or trackpad. It is a contemporary device, as is the computer, the camera itself. Both of these are kind of top of the line, and both of them are kind of modular. So we were able to configure them basically to what we need. But that also allows us to not really have to worry about upgrading these devices for the foreseeable future. Unless there's a major change in the industry or technology, these guys should be just fine for a while, quite a while, hopefully. Again, the device is a laptop. I can pick it up, move it around, as you saw Rachel display there. So we can actually use it off-site. We can use it across the street if we want to hook it up to our projector and give a presentation to the museum, or we have to go digitize, somebody finds a shoebox of images in their grandma's attic. We can just pick up and go with the computer and a couple devices that we hope to get in the future, which include a smaller copy stand, a smaller camera, and a couple film carriers, which all add up to a dedicated system for just film negatives, as well as a backup to our big system and off-site use. Everything, again, packs down really easily. Share your backup plans options. Did we skip over that? We may have. Well, the places that we're saving files, which I guess I can just go right to that.
Oh, I didn't talk about those. Sorry, that was my bad.
That's kind of important. Well, here, since it's right where I'm at, feel free to
go ahead.
chime in. So redundancy is the name of the game here. Like we said right at the beginning, these files shouldn't be considered as permanent. So having backups of backups of backups is very important. We've chosen to use Amazon Glacier as our offsite cloud storage. That's just one of many. If you are looking for different options, that's just one of them. We went with Amazon because we can be fairly confident that the service is not going to go away anytime soon. It's Amazon. They're probably going to take over the world. Besides that, we have our little external hard drives, as I showed you earlier. These are used for temporary storage, transferring,
and they're in
quick
both
things like that.
the metadata
Mhm.
and the capture
Right.
tabs.
We each have one. But then for bulk storage on site, we're going to use a RAID array, which allows for redundancies in and of itself and expansions and maintenance. So it's basically going to act like our personal in-house server. Anything to add to that?
And if you have questions about the RAID array systems, they actually come in different types. We're going with a 1+0 system or a 10, which is it has to do with striping and duplication processes. And I won't go into too much detail because we just don't have time for that. But if you have questions about that, or you're looking at some and you want to ask us questions, like I said, we've gone through all the research. We've visited with different people, and this system here specifically for images is the better system because of the way the redundancies work. Mm-hmm. And we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah,
because it gets messy.
Yeah,
it gets messy. All right.
Before I move on from that, the other side of things is actually great. Thanks. You're very welcome. Software. So like we've mentioned so far, we're basically using everything from the Adobe suite. Specific grants. Okay,
so Lacey, right now, and JAMA was one of the people that they mentioned. JAMA sent out an email that they have some small grants here in Arkansas specifically, and you might look at that. She's at the airplane museum.
Oh, okay.
Table.
Yeah.
Sorry, Lacey. But we're looking at the IMLS grant, specifically for the Museums of America. But the Walmart does community grants, and some of the other businesses in the area, you might talk to them.
Grants specific to digitization?
Yeah, those are that's what we've run into, especially for what we're doing, because we're not looking at like $350,000 worth of equipment and a new building. Or some of the grants that we looked at, and I will be happy to send you what we looked at. I have a folder, and you can send me a Facebook message, or you guys can email me here at the museum, and I'll send you a link to our Google Drive that has all of our research. And that includes the different grants that we've looked at. We've looked at the Gates Foundation. We've looked at Apple to see what they do.
But like we said in the beginning, digitization just kind of as an industry is relatively new, still kind of in its infancy. So it's not a household term at this point.
No. And sometimes you the IMLS grant that were the Museums for America, grant that we're working with, or that we just submitted the application, will grant up to $250,000. It's up to 3 years, and digitization is part of it in a way.
It's an aspect of it.
But there are ways that you can word those grants
Mhm.
to take advantage of what they're trying to do, but it supports your digitization efforts.
Yeah, digitization is the way that we're fulfilling the prompt for the grant. A little bit of finagling, but it's kosher.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Lacey? I hope. If not, you know how to get a hold of me, and we'll go into it more in depth. Anything
Where
else?
was I?
Yeah, Kaiser.
Software.
Oh,
software. We're using the Adobe Suite primarily for everything, as Rachel had mentioned. Specifically on my side, Photoshop and Lightroom. Just a quick differentiation between those two, because they kind of do the same thing. They share a lot of tools. For what we do, Photoshop is reserved for manipulating and altering an image, actually changing the base image itself, adding to it, subtracting, whatever. Whereas Lightroom is more just for processing your basic stuff, exposure, white balance, cropping, that kind of stuff. So inside of Lightroom, we actually have a plugin called Negative Lab Pro. And it does just what the name says. It's for specifically negatives, film negatives. And it allows you to, because when you photograph a negative backlit, as I showed, it shows up on the camera and the computer as a negative, and you have to invert it. And it's not as easy as just going into Photoshop and then clicking invert or switching your histogram. Using the plugin, it actually inverts it with a relative amount of accuracy, which is actually not the easiest thing to do in this day and age, surprisingly. But yeah, beyond that, the other thing that we're planning on upgrading is actually the copy stand itself. Like I said, it's a bit old, it's a bit janky, it's not as precise as it used to be. So we're planning on replacing that at some point. However, modern copy stands aren't cheap, and there aren't a lot of people who are producing them. But if that's something you want to consider, the company we're going with is called Kaiser, Kaiser. They're out of Germany. And they have a whole catalog of copy stands, different sizes, different peripherals and that sort of thing. And they're one of very, very few people still producing copy stands today. So they're worth looking at if that's something you're interested in.
So I'm going to try and share our screen here and show you the digital asset management system that we selected. We went with, maybe not. Sorry, guys. We went with Luna. And Luna has most of their collections that they've worked with are available online. So you can look up Luna Imaging. We liked David Rumsey's map collections specifically. Does that get it?
I think it was this one.
It was that one. Okay. Yeah.
Can you move that menu because it's behind that?
I'm gonna take this for a second. Luna. So it's not letting me access my controls. Sorry. Our system that we selected was Luna Imaging. And the reason that we went with Luna was it was cheaper in the long run. Look how slick it is.
I'll remove it just a little bit. There it is.
You'd think I don't use a computer very often. So it requires minimal coding. You only have to use phrases rather than strings of code. And what phrases you have to use, they provide in their user manual for all institutions. It is cheaper than Content DM, but you get a lot of the same features that we were wanting. It's also searchable through Google. WorldCat does search Content DM, but WorldCat's kind of one of those things that mostly librarians use. It's not going to be something that the general public's using. And so we like the fact that this was more Google friendly. We also like the API, which is the application programming interface. And it's just really slick. It's modern. It's user friendly. I can create my templates, and that's what we're looking at. Is Dublin Core is going to be our schema for metadata field. That tends to be something that museums use, but you can use Sears subject headings. You can use the Library of Congress subject headings, and kind of how they use the MARC records. There's different ways to do this. This one comes with simple labels, but we're using Dublin Core. I also modified our Dublin Core just a little bit. And then we're using the thesaurus for graphic materials as our primary control vocabulary, which is really what Sears subject headings and Library of Congress subject headings does. And now what AARC2 and RDA and all of those. So for the librarians in the crowd, you'll know what I'm talking about. For everybody else, don't worry about it. It's it's complicated and it's messy, and it's a series of lectures all of its own. But there are going to be some instances, and that's what we ran into was
I think stop share.
Stop share. There are going to be some instances that are very specific to our collection and very specific to the locations here. And so we've built some crosswalks for our local controlled vocabulary and for filling out our forms that'll help our future volunteers, because Bo and I have a shorthand and a system in place. In that packet that we're sending you, you also have access to the form that we're using for the creation of metadata. Those are the things that we're looking at. Those are the fields we're trying to fill in as we go along. And it's kind of messy, but it's information that's necessary. And I would like to point out that if you're putting this online and you're making it available to the public, keep that in mind. You're working with the public. You're not using an internal system. And that's one of the things that some of the places we went to, they were using an internal system, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything to the outside. We also had to create our own policies because it's a new department. And one of the things we weren't really considering, but we ran into quite early, was having to deal with pictures of children in various states of undress. I mean, it's, you know, historical photo collection. So we looked at child pornography laws. We agonized over child pornography laws. And basically, and we talked to our city attorney. We went through a lot of different things trying to determine what to do with this. And the child pornography laws basically outlaw digitization and publication of images of minors, that's anybody under 18, engaging in or simulating the engagement in sexual acts. But because Bo and I didn't really want someone to misuse or abuse our collections, we decided, and then it was approved by Alan, our director, and the museum board, that we wouldn't publish globally any images of children that were nude below the waist. On the other hand, we're not squeamish about presenting history as it was, and that includes sensitive issues and problematic history. So we'll be publishing images of protests, riots, KKK rallies, controversial historic figures, and events. And we will be digitizing everything in a collection once that collection's been selected. But we're also going to have to consider copyright and privacy laws. So while everything's going to be digitized, that doesn't mean that we're sharing everything with the public online. So some of the things that we're going to restrict are things that are like not in the public domain. Orphan works are especially problematic when you're talking about copyright. In general, the acceptable date is anything created 120 years before. And an orphan work, for anybody who isn't familiar with that term, is an item that you don't know who created it. You might have an idea of when based on clothing or, you know, location or something, but you don't know who created it. So right now, this year, anything created before 1900 it's kind of acceptable. It's a little squishy. So I like to use the ALA copyright slider. It's a free tool that's online. And it's not been updated in the last few years. And so this last year, we had new things that came into the public domain that hadn't been before. So I think it says that 1923. The year now is actually 1924. So anything published before 1924 is now in the public domain. There are some things like the movie McClintock and some of the Beatles music that's in the public domain because of other changes to the copyright law. And that's why I like the ALA copyright slider, because it asks a series of questions and then it tells you whether or not it's, you know, in the public domain or at least available for fair use. So I usually start there if it's after 1924. We also had to deal with international copyright, which is a headache in and of itself. So some of our postcards were published and created in European countries, and the country of origin also impacts your copyright policy and which laws you have to follow. So we had to look at German, French, and English copyright laws.
It's all in the book.
Yeah, it's all in the book, so I don't have to remember it. Actually, we kind of do at this point, but it's for whoever comes after us or our volunteers, or if we expand even the staff in our department, that information will be available. We're going to include in our metadata, we want a statement about the images that we do publish that lets the researcher know that we have attempted to ensure that the items that are published are in the public domain. But before they use it, it really is their responsibility to make sure that they're not infringing on somebody's copyright laws or copyrights. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and some other little pieces of the copyright law actually allow libraries who follow specific rules and are protected as libraries under the copyright law. And so museum archives can fall into this if you follow specific rules, to publish in-house digital copies that allow you to preserve the original and prevent excessive handling. It also, if an item becomes damaged, you haven't lost that information. And because Luna, the digital asset management system we chose, allows us to limit access to each item, not by collection, but by item, by IP address, we can go ahead and publish globally all of the metadata. So if somebody wanted to search to see what we have in our collection, they could go ahead and search the metadata, and we'll have all of that there. Once it's created, it will be published. But the images won't necessarily be there. And those will be restricted by IP address if they're images of children that we've determined are sensitive. It's living people, because there are privacy laws, especially in Arkansas, and also items that are not in the public domain. And for usage, we'll include a notice that basically restricts their use of our images to non-derivative, non-commercial use, and they have to give attribution.
Right. So I'm going to move on to just how we got where we are very briefly. When I first started here, coming up on 2 years now, the dark room was still across the street in the museum, and the digitization workspace was just in the hallway outside of the dark room. There wasn't proper office space, let alone lab space. So the reason this was problematic is we couldn't control it ourselves. We couldn't control the light. We couldn't control dust. It was open to the rest of the museum. It was open to the rest of collections. Staff would walk through continually, that sort of thing. We were fortunate enough that the city actually purchased a duplex just right across the street from the museum, and that's actually where we're at right now. This space was the master bedroom in half of the duplex. The master bathroom, which is right over there, is now the new dark room, which I had the pleasure of designing, which I enjoy very much. Then across the hall is Rachel's metadata lab. And then along with that, we now have the living room as well, which has become a conference space going forward once we can all be in the same room with each other again. Some of the things we had to do in order to renovate this space was get rid of popcorn ceiling, because popcorn ceiling is notorious for just dust forever. We had to get rid of the carpet, which again, talking dust and just hygiene, and we repainted the walls. Like I said, we're getting blackout curtains, that sort of thing. We have a ramp out in front of the building, which allows us, well, one, handicap access, but also to move racks of materials into here as we're digitizing. Other than the space itself, which has started to come together and a lot faster than we intended, which I'll get to in a second, we also had to kind of sort out our relationship with City IT. We are under the Springdale City. They are a parent organization. So up until recently, all of our IT needs, hardware, network, all that stuff was provided through Springdale IT. However, through a series of miscommunications and just conflicts with policies, it made it very difficult for us to move forward with our digitization. And just to clarify, the reason I'm telling you guys this is so you know how we handled it if you end up facing something similar. So a couple of things that were really problematic, like I said, we have a high-end computer here that we're going to be processing on. We had something similar provided through IT. However, as a part of their user policy, if you are not admin, you can't have access to certain parts within the computer for configuration, mainly the GPU configure, the graphics card. So basically what would happen is if you weren't an IT administrator, your computer that you were signed in on could not use your graphics card, and all of that processing information was forced and funneled through the CPU, the brain of the computer, killing it basically.
I killed 5.
Yeah, we've been through a few.
In 2 years.
It took us a while to figure this out, and there wasn't really a solution provided. One of the other issues is actually just the firewalls in place. We've had issues accessing the Adobe website. We had problems accessing Luna. We can't get on Ancestry.com, stuff like that. Things that are obviously safe and things that are very, very pertinent to what we're trying to do here. So our solution was to go rogue. We kind of declared independence, and with museum and board backing and approval, we are basically autonomous from IT at this point. We have got our own network through Cox. We have this computer, which we purchased ourselves through board funding. We are going to be
Sophos.
bringing in a security system for ourselves that we can maintain and regulate. We are going forward. We're going to be, doing the same thing, buying more devices ourselves, setting them up ourselves, maintaining ourselves. On that side of things, also storage was going to be an issue. Initially, we had intended to use server space provided by the city. However, part of the protocols is to compress things served on their city servers, which we can't do for digitization. It needs to stay uncompressed. So that was scratched off the list right off the bat. And coding. This is something we kind of worked around in general, but had we had chosen something like Islandora or Symphony, which would require extensive coding, that's not something that our city IT would have provided. Might be something different for you, but again, that's all on us.
And we have resources on that too,
yes.
Because at one point we were thinking that was the route we were going to go. And we've done some coding in-house now at this point.
A bit here and there.
And then some of our exhibits in our exhibit hall have been done in-house that require coding. So we're getting there.
So we're fairly competent when it comes to technology stuff, when it comes to computers, coding, that sort of thing. But we purchased this device through Best Buy, which was actually a very, very easy transaction. They were very helpful, answering questions, that sort of thing. But we also subscribed to their Geek Squad service. So should the need arise, we do have that in our back pocket just in case. Grants, we kind of touched on grants a little bit. We do still get funding through the city itself. Like I said, we are still technically under the city. We're still a part of the museum. It's just IT that we've kind of separated ourselves from a little bit. There are community partners, everybody knows Walmart, Tyson, those kinds of big companies out there. and for us in particular, we have board funds. Thankfully, that's how we are able to purchase the nice equipment that we have, is mostly through board funding. But interestingly, the thing that made this all come together as quickly as it did, everything that we've accomplished so far was a part of our 5-year plan. We've done it in like a year and a half. Was actually because of COVID. It made us super relevant because the desire behind digitization is to, one, preserve the items, the historical objects themselves, but also to increase access so that people can view the items. That has gone from a desire to a necessity now that people are no longer able to come on site and look at our collections. So it gave us, more reason to actually get going on the digitization side of things.
Made us more relevant.
Made us
all the way
definitely
around.
more relevant. But it also gave us the time we needed to make this happen, because this was a long process. As well,
and
as
we did it in-house.
we did everything in-house. We had to shift responsibility of some staff members here and there. Shout out to Curtis and Walt here at the museum. They helped renovate this entire space. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. But again, us, being super relevant now with allowing access to our collections, it was justification for us to expand quickly. So we kind of jumped on it and took advantage of it. Besides that,
This was our 5-year plan. And,
yeah,
and we're a year into our 5-year plan.
and
So
it's nice checking things off your list.
yeah.
The other thing we're going to be doing is actually a proprietary social media account for the DigiLab, us, which is just the two of us, if we haven't clarified. Specifically in Instagram, so we can actually promote our images, what we're doing, provide behind the scenes, do more Q&A, conversational stuff like this. So it's actually promoting ourselves to the public as opposed to waiting for the public to come to us. So really quick here, and then we'll get to some Q&A. Big takeaways are you got to make sure that your equipment that you choose to digitize with is compatible. You don't want a super high-end scanner/camera and then a computer that can't handle the files. So work within your budget. I mean, even if it's just a tripod and a cell phone, anything is better than nothing when it comes to digitization. So really, best thing you can do is just get started.
Yeah, just do it. That's our big deal
Yeah.
on this, is make sure that you're, get started, practice with this. The Luna stuff that you're seeing is our training. That is not what we're going to look like in the end.
Yeah.
That is just, the culmination of, 3 training sessions with the company.
And you can go on their site and
And
look
you
at
can
some
go on their
examples of catalogs that are established and very, very
Beautiful.
aesthetically pleasing and fun to go
They're
through.
amazing. But yeah, that's pretty much what we have here. There's more information in those packets. And if you come up with any questions, Angie, are they going to have access to our email account or our email addresses?
Well, they sure can if you want them to.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, if we can include that in the information that's sent out. That way, if you guys have any questions, Bo and I are more than happy to geek out over
Sure.
this.
This is us restrained.
Yes.
Okay, so you guys may have mentioned this, but maybe not. I already don't remember, because there was so much great stuff here. But is this your entire job, or how many hours a week do you get to put into this project?
That is a topic that is presently up for debate.
Okay.
We are still very much this is still a work in progress. We're not full into our digitization just yet. So we're kind of getting everything established at this point and then digging into it. We kind of have to get started before we really know how much time it's going to take.
And the situation right now with COVID also has made kind of job responsibilities very different.
Sure.
I'm working primarily from home. It's very unusual for anybody to see me here on site. And so the projects I'm working on at home tend to be a little more digitization and research, as opposed to some of the other responsibilities I would normally have here, because I am working from home, and I have access to only certain things there.
I have 2 slashes in my title. So not only am I just the staff photographer, but I also do all the darkroom stuff here. So that side of the process, just to touch on that very, very briefly, I will, again, just to further preserve the original images, I will copy them on film like the actual print itself. I will photograph it on the copy stand with a film camera. That's the one that was attached at the moment. Develop that and then make reference prints of the original prints so that there's a physical copy as opposed to just digital. So that's really the primary use of the darkroom.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're busy. So,
Oh yeah.
You have plenty to do. Yeah.
Oh yeah, always.
Yeah.
But it's worth it.
Well, it sounds really cool. So somebody just said, yeah, by Instagram, social media. So you mean the Shiloh Museum account?
No, ma'am.
No, it's going to be a separate account, just to make it nice and cohesive, all in one space, like just the DigiLab. Obviously, we're still going to be associated with the museum. We're still a part of the Shiloh Museum.
We didn't declare independence from them,
No,
just
no,
from
no.
our IT department.
So it's just going to be for us and our images and what we're doing. That is the plan anyway. And there's also might be a YouTube channel in there as well, just for tutorials and
Like
stuff like this.
where we could actually walk through the process, like from start to finish, or a specific aspect of that process.
Right.
People could,
Ooh,
that was worse.
Well, the U of A Museum has a great Instagram account
Yes.
where, it's not the photographs as much as it is the, are you guys discoing there? What's happening?
We're fighting with lighting behind us.
There's a window right
Yeah.
there.
No, there are some really great
There we go.
museum sort of specialty niche accounts on social media that I think will be, and yours will be really cool. I mean, I really enjoy those kinds of accounts.
Bev wants to know if we have a name for the Instagram account yet.
The account is not live yet. I'm sure we'll be.
Yeah, and
putting
we'll
it out
post
there.
it. We'll post it on our Facebook page and probably our webpage at some point, the museum's accounts,
Yeah.
so that, announcing that we've done this, and it'll probably go out in our newsletters.
Yeah, this is definitely museum sanctioned, so it's going to be museum promoted.
We're not entirely rogue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't see any other questions right now. But if any of you who are listening think of things, you can send them to me too, or to the Arkansas Museums at gmail.com, and we'll get back to you. And we'll send out answers, but you should expect the recording of this early next week, and we'll send the handout with it.
And you guys are more than welcome to reach out to us to see more information about what we did. This was a year and a half of research and just decision making and debating and all kinds of stuff to get to this point. And we want to share that information and make it as easy as possible on everybody else who decides to.
Well, this is sorry about the phone. Huge win for, I think, Arkansas history. So I really love that you're doing that, and you're making a great example for everybody else too.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I will, we'll call this, I guess we'll adjourn this meeting, right? And you'll all hear from me from arkansasmuseums@gmail.com pretty soon, in a few days. Thank you guys. Bo and Rachel, you were great.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.